In a town only without me, my friends spent the precious spare time of their lives on my behalf. A town without me alone. Time without me alone. That is my treasure, yo. This finale, I'm not going to lie to you, as I listened to the Sayuri ED greatness, as that montage went on near the end of this episode, seeing everyone all grown up living these fulfilled lives in a very realistic manner, you know, my boy Yuki finding happiness with his beautiful little Hoppa family, everyone getting together all grown up, you know, seeing Kayo with her child Mirai and Hiromi happy and everything like that. It was so endearing, I'm not going to lie to you. I had chills seeing that scene, coupled with the formal aspects of this series that, you know, bolstered it and, you know, laid the foundation for this intricate narrative and, you know, the great attention to detail that made this ride so incredible. You know, the cinematography, the beautiful animation, the attention to the symbolism and the detail, the deep and complex dialogue, that Yuki Kaiju, the greatness that was the OST, man. I just felt as though this finale was wholly conclusive and gave me a great sense of closure to this beautiful journey. I'm a little salty that Kazu and Aya didn't end up together in that montage. It didn't seem like they were together. They were vibing nicely with their children. But then again, any OTP that I saw set up, any pairing that I really wanted to have, got shafted. But that's neither here nor there. This finale, working as a finale for me, from the anime-only perspective, I definitely love the episode. I definitely love the finale, and it was a great conclusion to this amazing journey. Like I said, one of my favorite and most incredible journeys of this season. But that is not to say, even from the anime-only perspective, because I know the manga readers have great issues with the turn that the series took. But from my perspective, even this finale is not without its problems, which definitely do detract from the impact and overall dilute the entirety of the series for me. But that's not to say that I didn't love the ending. Okay, so bear with me. We're gonna dive into it. Boku dake ga Inai Machi, episode 12, the finale. I want to keep this short, but honestly, we all know how that goes every time. We all know, which is just, it's probably going to be quite the long video. I'm gonna say that right now. And here's where I want to start off with, before I get into Yashiro, before I get into the final confrontation, to the ending, to the dialogue, which to me was definitely the shining part of this episode, with just Satoru's monologues, the dialogue with Yashiro, everything like that. Before I get into anything else, that I need to talk about that final scene. Airi. What did I say? Here's the thing, I knew that they had to bring Airi back if we were going to get a good end and have her pair up with Satoru, because that was the only way to remedy one of the greatest NTRs of all time that just smacked us all in the face last week. Our ship going down like the fucking Titanic, crashing into the iceberg that was Hiromi, man. And that's the thing. I want to readdress this real quick before I talk about Airi some more. I'm not mad. Like I said last week, I'm not mad that Airi didn't end up with Satoru. As a matter of fact, it makes the narrative more realistic as a whole. It doesn't make sense for him to have waited for her to have waited for him for all that time, and especially their relationship as children wasn't really rooted. There was always something off about it. I mean, I loved it. I truly did. But at the same time, you always had to remember that he was a 29-year-old when they were forging that bond. And ultimately, his concern for her was rooted in the fact that he was trying to save her. Okay, so I knew, and I was happy for Kayo overall, that my goddess could find happiness, have a family. I love that. The only problem that I have with it, and I still do, is that it's fucking Hiromi, the god tier trap. How? It couldn't have been anyone else, and especially I'm salty because, you know, how are you gonna do that to your boy? But I digress. The only way to remedy that massive NTR was to bring Airi back into the picture. And in all honesty, aside from the fact that it does feel a little bit forced, it works. It works especially with the butterfly symbolism, tying in, the timeline and the ripple effect, and how, this was somewhat destined and predetermined in terms of, kind of accounting for everything that took place with Satoru's changes in the timeline, especially, which is the reason why I'm so okay as well with Hiromi and Kayo being together, two factors that were supposed to be expunged in the original timeline. I think it works. It's very reminiscent of me, even though it lacks that impact of the ending of Steins Gate. And that's simply because Airi, while I absolutely love her, dude, and I'm perfectly fine with this pairing, and I'm happy with it. It definitely was endearing to me to see that, especially since I think it works far more, in all honesty, than Kayo x Satoru. As much as I wanted that, it definitely works far more. But Airi isn't 1/10 of one of my favorite female characters of all time, that is Kurisu. So it lacks that kind of impact and that destiny of that final meeting in Steins Gate, but it definitely mirrors that in that way. But to see her, I knew they had to bring her back. I just love the impact of that final scene, coupled with the dialogue and everything like that. Satoru kind of panning over and seeing the butterfly, Airi's words to him, and especially with the thread and the final theme tying together with this episode of believing and trusting in others. And, how much that thought process in Satoru was influenced by Airi, and how much she genuinely changed him. If it weren't for Airi, none of these, even with him going back with the revivals, things would have been completely different if he did not have Airi in his life in the original timeline. So to see that, I'm perfectly fine with that. But that aside, let's get into the episode as a whole. First of all, I need to say this right now, because many people were doubting me and saying that they disagree, and that Satoru got his memories back when Yashiro was in fact tapping on the wheelchair. What did I say? Okay, as soon as he touched hands with Mirai, and I would still love it if it goes down that kind of shonen-esque route, and now Mirai has the revival powers, and that's why Satoru is never used again, even though he fulfilled the goal he set out to fulfill, and that's probably why the powers were bestowed on him in the first place, even though we don't really know how it truly works on that supernatural kind of timeline, time travel level. If Mirai now has the ability to revival, especially with his name and the symbolism of that, and we can get like an epilogue of the future and Mirai using it, that would be fucking amazing. But I digress. I knew that's when he got it back, and when we can jump into the conversation with Yashiro from here, but as Yashiro was just straight up like, yo, you stifled your response. I could tell as I forced myself to tap on the back of the wheelchair, and I'm like, yo, just that smile as he got into his face. Absolutely fiendish, dude. And the final confrontation with Satoru and Yashiro definitely gave me even more insight into Yashiro's character, but at the same time is my biggest problem with the finale, and I'll get into why. First of all, it was incredible. Dialogue-wise, finding out Yashiro's final scheme, how he planned to frame Satoru for the murder of Kumi, indirectly getting in, a quick little, young girl murdering after many years of being out of the game, being completely obsessed with Satoru and trying to finish things with him. He's trying to set him up for that, push him off of the top of the building and make it look like a suicide. It'd be all good. And here's the thing. It lacked tension for me as far as Yashiro's scheme going according to plan, simply because I could tell. I said it from last week that Satoru wouldn't go up there without a plan. And the way they did the back and forth, going back to the scene with Kenya and Hiromi, and, them realizing that Satoru had regained his memories, going back to the scene with Sachiko and her realizing that he had regained his memories, I knew that he had something in place. And that's what I said last week too as well, from the marker of when he regained his memories, the kind of discrepancy between the childlike voice narrating and the elder voice narrating disappearing, the way he was acting, really getting close to Yashiro to kind of mark what he's been doing these past few years, prepare himself, put this plan into place, and at the same time save Kumi's life. Wouldn't have been possible if he immediately confronted Yashiro with his regained memories at the time when he encountered him. So to see that, and let's talk about those scenes before we proceed forward and really kind of talk about the problems as well as what I really love with the episode as far as dialogue is concerned. First of all, a scene with Kenya, man, and it really, that at that point, his dialogue with how he was saying that he and Hiromi, always believed in him, and they wanted to repay him for, Satoru trusting them and believing in them. They always kept fighting for him. He became a lawyer, was working with Sawada-san to bring the truth to light. Hiromi wanted to become a doctor in order to work towards saving Satoru and potentially waking him up from his coma and everything like that. And we find out that even the little bitch that was Misato was instrumental in, paying medical bills for Satoru that entire time, working to raise funds for him and being adamant, coming to visit him time and time again. And at that point, a little bit, part of me was like, are they really going to try and remedy it by not bringing Airi back into it and having him met up with Misato? And I thought that especially during the montage, when she came into, the little bar and everything, and we saw Satoru's face, I was like, they're going to go this route. And it was somewhat realistic. If that had been how it went, it would be somewhat realistic to me. I mean, I think it's probably even more so realistic than the whole Airi meeting and that kind of strings of fate, the timeline ripple effect, butterfly effect kind of thing being the reason for that. But that aside, I'm glad that he didn't have Misato, even though I love to see how she changed and how everyone grew up and came together, fighting for Sato and everything like that. But that was the moment when I knew they'd bring Airi back, because, and that's what really strings it together and makes that pairing work so well, is the theme of believing in others, and especially what Satoru says about belief, which I want to talk about a little bit later in this review. But, seeing it in that moment and seeing that flashback, which he's had time and time again through his days in the past, trying to save everyone and whatnot, it was beautiful. But aside, the dialogue with him and Sachiko, the line about taking, the bull by the horns, which completely counteracts, Yashiro's scheme at the time of trying to send this dying message to his mother, because she would have never believed it based on that scene. So I knew that the entire time Satoru was baiting her, but it was such a touching scene to see one of the greatest mothers of all time, like I said last week, just up there with the greats for me personally, to see that scene and that touching scene between them where she realized and how she talked about how she felt bad that she had kind of restrained Kenya and HIROMI from saying what was truly on their mind, and how she couldn't bring herself to hinder Kayo from, speaking the truth and thanking him and saying what was on her heart after 15 years of waiting to thank him after he finally woke up. So to see that, I think those scenes were definitely nice touches, and also played in to the scene with Yashiro, but at the same time detracted from the intensity, because you knew that Satoru was baiting me. I mean, if you didn't pick up on it, it was probably a little bit more impactful there. But that aside, the dialogue with Yashiro was amazing. Just the fiendish expressions. I love the flashbacks of certain scenes, like when he was actually in the hideout and he kicked the box, and when he was watching, Satoru trying to save Aya as a kid, and you just see these disgustingly twisted expressions on his face, dude. And I just love that little adage. It was amazing to see. But Yashiro, an ultimate fiend. And overall, I have to say that I'm satisfied with this character. I really am satisfied with how things turned out and the final confrontation between Satoru and overall. The biggest problem with the episode that I have is that the clash is somewhat anticlimactic for me. Overall, as a matter of fact, not even somewhat, it definitely is anticlimactic and lackluster, and that's the biggest problem. Even though the episode as a whole, as a finale, has that conclusive feel, and it was a beautiful, good end, and I definitely enjoyed it, and I love the episode overall, it's the confrontation between Satoru and Yashiro that falls short. On the one hand, the dialogue between the two, the whole spider, the spider's thread symbolism, and I love how they threw that in, and somebody pointed out, I believe it was my boy Zara, pointed out, last week via Twitter, that going back to episode 1, once Sachiko found out who the killer was, there's a shot of the spider's thread being over her head as well. But showcasing that, the spider web in the corner this week and last week and everything like that, Yashiro's whole mentality and how that came into play, it was beautiful. And Satoru really peering into his mind at that stage, realizing that in the same way, and he admits to this, that Yashiro filled the hole in his heart, and then it kind of gets into this kind of father figure role that Yashiro filled for him saying that his starkest memory of Yashiro in the past was when he had helped him save Kayo, and he turned and gave him that smile and those kind words and everything like that. He truly looked up to him, which is why it hurt him so much to find out that Yashiro is the one behind all this, and this building up the bond between them, because vice versa, Satoru filled the hole in Yashiro's heart. And I love going back to the comparison of the little bit of backstory we got into Yashiro with, Spice the hamster and everything like that, the spider's thread story and whatnot, and everything like that. It was deep, and the dialogue that Satoru had definitely was on point in that moment. But ultimately, him not wanting Satoru to die because he became obsessed with him, and Satoru knowing this because he would have killed him over the course of these 15 years if that was really the case, he could no longer even go about his regular regiment and his philosophy of killing people to fill this hole, because Satoru, as an existence, the only person who truly recognized and peered into Yashiro's soul, was there, and he couldn't move on from that. He couldn't, live without Satoru either. I think it really showcases the mentality of Yashiro a lot, but at the same time it falls short because we don't have that context of Yashiro's true backstory that I know is in the manga. So that is one portion of why it definitely falls short for me, why the confrontation is a little bit lackluster, despite the intensity of the dialogue and how, it really fleshes out the mentality of both of these characters and the bond between them and what they meant to each other, especially with this whole game of cat and mouse throughout the series. I would have liked a bit more as well of a tension in this final arc and a back and forth and, kind of playing and games being played between Kenya, Sawada, and, Satoru and Yashiro, which manga readers have told me is limited and definitely in the final arc of the manga, which is limited by the time constraints of this finale and of the 12-episode course. So ultimately, because of the time constraints and because of things that were glossed over, that final confrontation between them was somewhat lackluster despite the amazing dialogue and the emotions in the scene. Dude, that wink though, when I saw them, because I was like, how are they really gonna to save this? And when he was just caught by the little blow up cushion and everything like that, and he gave him that wink, I was just like, yo, like, it was hype. It was straight up hype. I can't even deny it. It was straight hype. And the thing that gets me, and here's why I genuinely can't wait to get into Yashiro's backstory and to find out more about his character and what shaped his mentality, because right now it feels as though I only really have like 60 to 75% of the puzzle as far as his persona goes, but ultimately I'm happy and pleased with the character, and I love the character overall because I love villains, even though we didn't get to see a more dynamic kind of battle between them at the end, which I really would have loved and made it more, kind of crazy and real and intense, which it was definitely lackluster, like I said. Even with that, the way the man went out. Now, I hate when villains go out on that Yagami light, sore loser status, writhing and fiending and begging and everything like that, and in utter disbelief. The man just chuckled, realized he had been beaten, admits to the way his mentality worked, and that Satoru is right about everything he said about how Satoru filled the hole in his heart. And I love the symbolism of the spider's thread dissipating from above his head, showcasing that he, mirroring Kandata from the story, he's been freed from this at the same time as he's fallen off of the thread. It's no longer consuming him. So it really is kind of deep in terms of the transformative nature of Yashiro's character and where he comes from, but ultimately I can't get a full picture of it without more depth to it, and I wanted more intensity with that final battle, more involvement with Kenya and the back and forth, everything like that. It was too apparent too that Satoru was baiting with him, and that was probably my biggest problem with this finale, is the lack of intensity with that final confrontation and the lack of depth to Yashiro's character that could have been even expanded on so much more. But that aside, let's talk about the dialogue as a whole. And it's been a lot of things that I've been hinting to throughout, as far as, and the line that I really love, aside from the one that I read at the beginning of the review, about, that final scene, and talking about Satoru's treasure and how the town without him, kind of mirroring Kayo's story and the underlying title of the series and everything, kind of ultimately comes full circle and is referring to Satoru and everything that he did. As he said to Yashiro, I've already won. I saved everyone in my life, and by sacrificing myself, by sacrificing those 15 years, which he already lived previously in the prior timeline anyway, so it really wasn't hard for him to kind of re-assimilate into society, really, and ultimately it was a very happy end, which I think the happiness of it could have been toned down as well and had some little somber notes, but overall it was great to me and very endearing. But that aside, to see that he's like, by sacrificing that, everyone in my life got to live. You were completely bested and stopped, and this is ultimately a much better timeline than the prior one, even though they kind of come in line in various intersections. And like I said prior, with that kind of Steins Gate comparison, the divergence meter, I don't really think it makes a full shift from Alpha to Beta timeline until really this point and this final episode. So that all being said, that as well as his line to Kenya and everything after Yashiro's arrest, where he's like, believing in something, believing in someone, saying that kind of showcases that you don't truly believe. It's like saying, I believe in air. Okay, and Kenya's like, so you're saying that that's a falsehood, that's a lie? He's like, no, I'm not saying that by stating that you believe in someone or something that it's a lie, but it showcases that you don't truly believe. What it shows is that you have that hope and that desire, to want to believe in something. Just certain points of the dialogue that were so deep, as well as the the scene where he's under the bridge, where he and Airi, where we finally get to hear the story he wrote as a child, my hero. talking about taking the first step, relying on and believing in others, again, bringing in that theme of believing and trusting in others, and something that Satoru at the beginning of the series truly never did. He isolated himself. He was extremely cynical. He was and through this journey, more so than this was, a mystery and them trying to decipher who the killer was, save everybody, the time travel elements, the dramatic elements, it was very much, Satoru growing and coming of age as a person all over again and becoming a better person for it. And a big part of it was the people that he had in his life, stemming from Airi, going back, forging even deeper bonds with his friends at the time, who, saving these lives and having this, greater group of friends at the time, tying in the whole thing with the anime superhero that he had been seeing the entire time, talking about belief and courage and everything like that. It was awesome. I really loved that dialogue, and to see that scene, finding out that in line with the first timeline, he again becomes a mangaka, much more successful than he ever was, drawing on the experiences of what just took place throughout the entirety of the series. He has an anime in the works, which, tell me, if anybody else saw that fucking that promotional poster for the anime adaptation that he had in the works, looked like some straight up Guilty Crown shit. Like, the promotional visual looked straight up like Guilty Crown. I'm not even lying. I'm like, yo, what is this? But that aside, I love the overall theme of the episode, and really kind of bringing to the forefront this running theme that had been in the series throughout, and using it to kind of tie a bow on the series, wrap everything up, and give it this deep, conclusive feel, in line with this endearing, happy, and good end that we got, which, like I said, maybe a little bit too happy, maybe a little bit too endearing, and it might rub people, a little bit the wrong way that everything turned out so perfectly in the end. And like I said, that aside, one of my biggest problems is the lackluster nature of the confrontation between Yashiro and Satoru. Even though there was depth to the dialogue, even though I love how he baited him, and it had that little bit of intensity, especially when he was holding him, stopping him from dropping, the getting to that point of understanding Yashiro's mentality, even though I can kind of get there, I can't make it 100% because of the things that were glossed over, and because there was less of a back and forth in this last arc, between them, and this game that they were playing, it just lacked that intensity. It was just a bit anticlimactic for me, and it kind of brought down the overall level of this episode. It kind of, dilutes the series as a whole and brings it down because it feels rushed at the end. It feels constrained, and ultimately, if it weren't for that, this series, which could have been, straight up like 9.5, even near 10 out of 10 levels, is instead for me probably somewhere 8.5, 8.7, out of 10 right now. I mean, I'm definitely gonna have to binge it again at some time in the future and really reevaluate, but I think that right now as a final score, that's what I would give Boku dake ga Inai Machi. It was an incredible ride, one of my favorite of the winter season, still definitely a contender for anime of the year, although we're going to have some greatness coming our way next season and the following seasons, dude, that could definitely easily blow it out of the water. I'm not even going to lie to you, but it was an incredible ride overall, despite some of the problems I had with this finale. It was deep, especially with the dialogue. It was impactful. I felt the emotions, and I loved it. I wanted that happy end overall, so I'm happy about it, dude. So that's pretty much it, man. Let me know your thoughts. I know this was a long-winded review, as always. Probably one of the longest ones we've ever done for Boku dake, and that's fitting because it's the finale. We gotta wrap everything up. But let me know your thoughts on this review, on the final episode, on Boku dake as a whole, and I'm out.